if I can, I'd like to do a somewhat longer discussion. It's going to be a little bit of a metaphysical discussion. It's going to, even though I don't normally condone a lot of, or I don't normally approve of a whole lot of, discussions of metaphysics, but I think that there are some metaphysics that are worth, going into. There are some metaphysics that are, worth considering. And I think that because there are some metaphysics worth considering, I think that everything that the metaphysics is about, I think, deserves a chance. I think just to be thought about. But I guess my main thing here is I want to discuss what parts of it are what I think as an idealist or a phenomenological thinker, what of all the metaphysical things is worth doing, worth continuing, and because of that, why I want to talk about universals and properties and particulars and tropes, all the things together. And I want to discuss a metaphysician named F.P. Ramsey, and discussing his discussion of universals. But I guess when I think about metaphysics, what is contained here is a discussion about entities, and often about being, which entails metaphysics and stuff like that, and which is what entities is about. And then you have things like, you have ontology, which does being. And in my opinion, ontology is the most important, or the only vital part of metaphysics anymore. And vital, I mean, in the most strict sense of vital. But what I'm thinking here is that there are things like identity, necessity, contingency, and stuff like that I think is worth doing. Causation and causality is worth doing in metaphysics. The metaphysics of events, I think, is worth doing. But the things I don't think is worth doing is also grounding being non-causal relation. Talking about relation is also something that I think is worth doing. But things I don't think is worth doing is stuff that is, stuff that presupposes the ontological physical existence of certain things without actually going into, knowledge at first. And I think there needs to be a sort of a epistemology first idea going through here. If you're going to do any sort of metaphysics, you have to do some sort of epistemology first, because you have to consider what can be known. But I think regardless of what entities there are, I think things like metaphysics of identity and necessity, possible worlds, modal or modality, specifically of David Lewis and stuff like that, I think is worth doing in metaphysics. But what I don't think is worth doing is discussing and arguing for Platonism. I don't think that's worth doing. I don't think it's worth arguing for universals. I don't think it's worth arguing for particulars and properties and their distinctions. And furthermore, I don't think it's worth arguing about tropes either, because you can't really individuate them, I guess. You can't individuate tropes. But I guess I want to go into this a little bit more here. But what I want to do here is mostly sort of consider. I want to talk about universals, particulars, and properties, and as well as tropes. But the reason I'm doing this is mostly just because I want to eventually come to the conclusion that talking about entities in metaphysics is worthless. For one, by arguing that talking about universals and properties and particulars is worthless, and saying that since you can't talk about those three things, you'll be led to something like discussing a trope, and and that eventually to say that, a trope is not really worth doing either. My arguments might be sort of spotty here and there, but I just want to sort of get into this a little bit. So basically, what a particular is in metaphysics, it is this sort of like this pen will be an example of a particular. It has certain properties instantiated into it. Whether you have by the way, there's two ideas of properties. There's a bundle theory, and there's the attribute theory. The bundle theory is when you have it's sort of where the idea of a trope comes from. But the idea of a bundle theory is where a bunch of properties are collaborated together. Sort of like an onion. You know how an onion has layers. It sort of felt like there's a bunch of properties wanted together into this thing that happens to become a entity. And the other one is the attribute theory, where you are talking about a inner metal, inner skeletal metaphysical core, where the properties are like pincushions that are instantiated in the particular. So basically, a particular can be looked at as a certain combination of properties into this big bundle or an onion-like structure of an object, or it can be looked at as this, a certain arrangement and collection of properties among properties as pins among a pincushion that are put inside the pincushion. So basically, that's what a particular is. A particular is thought of to be something with a specific collaboration and arrangement, collaboration and arrangement of certain properties into a bundle, or certain collaboration and arrangement and collection of properties as pincushions instantiated in a sort of in an object. Now, a property can be described as a characteristic, such as if you say we could have if I'm thinking about the bundle theory of properties, then this pen has the property of greenness. And it has the property of elongatedness. It has the property of shininess. It has the property of smoothness. It has the property of writing ability. It has the property of all these things. Properties are characteristics. Greenness is a characteristic. Smoothness is a characteristic. Elongatedness is a characteristic. Basically, anything with the word "ness" put on the end of it, somethingness, which is a characteristic. Now, properties can be arranged and can be collaborated and collected among an object to create certain particulars. Now, there's this sort of distinction between properties and particulars. Furthermore, going into this whole idea of properties, you have the idea of a universal, which ultimately comes from Plato. Now, Plato, in his dialogue called the Republic, he talked about the Platonic heavens, which is where you have the forms. You have the form of the good, you have the form of justice, you have the form of the dialectic, you have the form of knowledge, you have the form of all these things, and these are sort of abstracted entities. Now, what is meant by? Now, there are a couple good videos on YouTube which is basically an argument going between Mr. Cropper and Johannes Ratz, two people who are Johannes Ratz is the Platonist and Mr. Cropper is the objectivist by Ayn Rand, who basically had this debate where they went back and forth discussing whether Platonism is a correct idea or not. So basically, what this is, it's basically saying that there's a form, let's say we're talking about the form of greenness. There's a form of greenness which is not really, sitting somewhere. It's not really as well as Mr. Cropper has said this a few times in a couple of his videos. He said he explains abstraction as greenness, the property of something or the universal of something, is not something that's just sitting somewhere. That's it's not an entity that's just sitting somewhere. It's not a concrete entity that's just sitting somewhere. By as itself, it's something that is universal and abstract, exists in many places at once. It is instantiated in many particulars. Therefore it exists in many places at once, which is why it is abstracted. Which is why Plato talks about the Platonic heavens and how the ideas of mathematics and number and properties and forms and universals and all that stuff lives up there. Well, he called them forms. He didn't really call them properties or universals. And then there's the ongoing, continuous debates in philosophy of mathematics about whether, about where these, about whether abstract, forms and properties exist, and if so, where do they lie? And there's a philosopher of mathematics, Maddie, has talked about how they're not really in the heavens, but they're here among us. And that, you can talk about that all you want, I think. And, number in mathematics is just another one of the forms that can be argued for or against when you're attacking or defending Platonism. Now, what I want to refer to is a paper by F.P. Ramsey. Ramsey had a paper called Universals, which explains for me very well the reason why you can't have a distinction between universal and particular, or property in particular. He has this example where he's using two sentences, where in a sentence where in a sentence you have a subject and you have a predicate, where the subject is the thing that is being referred to, and the predicate is the thing that the subject is or has. This is best by just saying Ramsey's example. He states two sentences here. The sentence, Socrates is wise. There's the subject in the sentence is Socrates, of course, and the predicate of that sentence is wise. So you're basically saying that Socrates, the subject, is the predicate wise. This can be flipped to have a different structure, which will basically mean the same thing, where Ramsey gives a different sentence here. Wisdom is a characteristic of Socrates. Now, first of all, before I go any further, do you notice any difference of meaning in the sentences? Socrates is wise, and wisdom is a characteristic of Socrates. They're both basically saying Socrates has wisdom. They're both saying the same thing. So it's basically, in the sentence, wisdom is a characteristic of Socrates. Wisdom is now the subject, and Socrates is now the predicate. In the first sentence, Socrates is wise, we're talking about and referring to Socrates. And in the second sentence, wisdom is a characteristic of Socrates, where we're referring to and talking about wisdom. So we're talking about two different things, but we have two sentences that are the same meaning, where the subject and the predicate are flipped around, but yet we have the same thing. So this is the example Ramsey uses to refute the distinction between particular or universal and particular and universal or property, because it's saying basically that there is no real distinction between the two. Because basically, what the whole thing is that you have, we're talking about, when we have Socrates, we're talking about a particular, and wisdom is also the particular here. So when this sentence is used, when these two sentences are used, you're showing that there's no real distinction between universal and particular. It's just saying that there's only, particulars. There's only certain kinds of particulars. There's no real properties which exist in many places at once, but there is many particulars where there's only one property per particular which exists only in that one place at that one time. So basically what I guess I'm trying to figure out a way to, I guess what I'm kind of stalling here is I'm trying to figure out a way to show you the example about how I can think about a universal in a particular here, but then when really, I wish I could find. I can't find that book. But all right, I'm going to use the pen again. First of all, we have a bunch of properties or universals here, and then we also have the particular of the pen. When really, what we have here is something that is a certain kind of green among a certain kind of metallicness, and we have a certain kind of object where I guess it would be really difficult unless I had an exact replica of this thing. It would still be a little bit different. I mean, I guess I can say that there's the property of green, that there's a universal of greenness, or of this kind of greenness, but there are different. There's might be this color, but it might not be this exact hue or exact way that this greenness is exhibited. But I guess this is better explained when I give you the definition of a trope. A trope. I'm going from a. I'm looking at a definition by Keith Campbell and one other person. A trope is a property that can only exist in one location. So basically, a trope is something that is thought to be property but exists in one space at one time. Such as, but you mean like you can have six, as Campbell and a guy's name I can't pronounce. I only know of Keith Campbell. He's the guy I know of. I don't really know of the other guy, but he talks about tropes. Like you can have 6 green tropes. Like you can have many different ones of these. You can have many different sort of tropes that resemble this trope. But they are not properties that exist in 6 different places, because each trope is different, which is why they're sort of, not, that's why they don't exactly blend in. But, and I guess, this has to be, if you're going to do any metaphysics of entities, then this would have to be the way that you would have to go, is because I really think that the idea of something being abstract is not exactly a good thing to do, I wouldn't say. It's not really the best thing to think about, things that are abstract, because abstract, I don't know, I guess the only thing that the tropes can have is mere resemblances. They can merely resemble each other, but there is not enough similarity. Like, just because, like, here, let me find another thing that's green. Or look at this green wall over here. I know these are two different shades of green, but ooh, even better. Wait, that's that blue. Is that blue? Here's that. Look at that. Look at those two kinds of green. The wall between the wall and this book. Now, those are very close colors, but there's very different shades of these colors. There's very different shades of green, and that's why I would have to, if I'm a total full blown trope theorist, then I would have to say that there's a green trope here and a green trope on the wall. Or the wall is itself a green trope. Because I think remember I have a video called Epistemological Colors where I'm saying that you really can't talk about color properties, because you can't, because let's say you have socks in a store, where you look at them and they seem black. They look to you, they look black in the store, but then you go out of the store and they're not, now they're blue. Or, just that fact right there, that just shows that there's something different about that one entity as opposed to other things that seem to stay a different color of black. Even if something is one color most of the time, I can make it change color by doing whatever, and that's only because of the certain makeup or the certain characteristics of that entity, and it's only because of that makeup of that entity, which is why I will see different colors when I do different things. When I put a shadow over it, or if I, do whatever to this. So I think we can, which is why I don't think that you can have a universal property of this green color or this green color, which is why you're going to have many, maybe at least 12 different sort of green tropes, which are close to these two kinds of green of this book and that wall. But they're not similar. They're mere resemblances. They merely resemble each other. They're merely resemblances. And I think that basically leads you to not being able to identify, properties anymore. You're just basically... And again, a trope is a property that can only exist in one place at one time. And 6 different objects, all be green, would be each object have its own distinct green trope. So I guess I'm trying to relate this to idealism in a sense, because I guess a metaphysics of tropes. If I was going to do any metaphysics at all, it would be a metaphysics of tropes. Just because I don't believe in properties, I don't believe in abstract entities. I only believe in concretes. I only believe in those things. But if you take away things like universals and properties, what I think you're doing is you are taking away some sort of familiarity, I think, with things that you're seeing. And I think this can, in a way, lead to being skeptical of things that you're, I don't know. But I guess I guess my main thing that I would be saying is, if I was to think about any metaphysics at all, it would have something to do with tropes. And like I said before, there are other kinds of metaphysics that are worth doing, like identity, causality, necessity, contingency, modality, and all that stuff, which is worth doing. But I think if you're going to talk about entities at all, as if you are aware of them in any sense, it would have to be some sort of theory of tropes. But I don't know. I've thought about tropes for a while, so I wanted to bring that to your attention. Sorry if this is a long video.